Then we already go to the final presentation. A man that is in the industry for a long time. You see at clubs usually that people are changing a club. But I think Andrew joined QPR back in 2008. And I don't think, I think he envisioned the entire change in the football scouting industry. So going from the really old school industry to scouting in the digital age. He started at QPR as the head of performance analysis, and now he's the head of recruitment. And I think he can tell great stories. He told me some great stories when we met in Boston a few months ago. But I would love to have him here on stage. And Andy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Firstly, I hope everybody and their families are safe and well during this difficult time. I must say I've actually really enjoyed listening to the other three presentations. Very insightful. I've been watching a few of the questions come through during the three presentations. I think I will try and answer some of them as I go along. I think they will probably fit into my presentation. I'll just start my slides. Hopefully you can all see that. So yeah, I think just a bit touching on my background. I'm probably more from an academic analyst background, really. I started as an analyst. I worked out in Dubai. I had the fortunate pleasure of working with Stuart when we were out in the UAE. I then moved to QPR 2008. It's a long time ago. Headed up their performance analysis, then went into the recruitment analysis 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And then as of January, became the head of recruitment. So the background of it is, my background is an analyst background, which will fit into the scouting in the digital age of this topic. One of the questions I get asked quite a lot is how you ended up at that player. You know, what was the process? Obviously, there's thousands and thousands of players out playing, and there's thousands that could play in the championship for QPR. So how did you end up at that one specific player? So I just wanted to touch on the process that we go through, obviously without giving out too many secrets. So we almost work on a 5-stage process. The first stage is identification. So, you know, player coming, who they came from. This could be anything. It could be from agents giving you players. It could be contract ending. It could be Premier League squads, best players, League One, League Two, teams likely to get relegated. Anywhere and everything, really. We're quite open to, you know, in terms of a strategy, in terms of who we start off, because obviously the players will be reduced as we go through the process. And I suppose the second stage is what we're going to talk about more today, is the data and video side of it, the scouting in the digital age, if you like, almost from a recruitment analyst, which was my role before. Now, I suppose with the COVID situation, we're all working in that stage at the moment because there is no live games, and you know, certainly in England there may not be any live games for a foreseeable future that we can get into in terms of those being behind closed doors. So this is the first stage that they go through. You know, do they fit with our data models? Do they fit with our player profiles? They might be very good players, you know, who could play for QPR, but do they fit in with what we are looking for? You know, there's no point just bringing in a squad full of great players if they can't all work together. There's been examples of that in the past, not just at QPR, but at many clubs, I would imagine, where they don't quite fit. So you've got a team of individuals rather than a team of players. So every player is scrutinised through data and video. You know, obviously you can't get data on a lot of players if you're looking at Premier League squad players, or you're looking at under 23 players, or even lower down the pyramid. You know, the data becomes rarer and rarer. So then obviously you have to rely on the video, your Y Scouts, your Instats, and many other platforms. And that all fits in. Does that fit in with your, you know, your player profiles? Can they do what you're asking them to? For example, if you're looking for a winger to cross the ball, is he crossing from the right areas? Is he playing the right crosses? You know, to your, you know, play your big number 9. Is it what you're looking for? And I think although you probably wouldn't, you wouldn't go and sign players purely off video. I think what you can do is you can rule out a lot of players. So you can start whittling down the players to go through the pyramid, if you like, in terms of that phase. So I think it was touched on earlier through one of the presentations. I think in terms of if you're, a smaller recruitment department and you don't have people based in every country, this is a way of working through players quickly in terms of producing a smaller list. Clubs will have lists all over the world, but some of the lists could be too big. You would never get round them in terms of, although February the 1st, it might seem like a long time till the summer window opens. And it, to be honest, it's getting longer a little bit at the moment, but it's actually only about 20 weeks. Now, a lot can happen. You've got a lot of players to get around in those 20 weeks, and you need to see them more than once, twice, 3 times to get a fully understanding of what they're trying to do. Now, I think one thing that can happen is you can stretch your net too wide in terms of, and you will never get round the players you want to get round. So I will come back onto the data and video side in terms of the recruitment analyst and data modeling as we go through a few more slides. So that's the first real stage for us really in terms of that. And then it goes into live viewing. So stage 3, your people on the ground, your part-time scouts, because you can still get a lot of information from videos, but you need those little bits of extra information on live games. What are they doing? How do they react to certain situations? How do the teammates react to them? Are they somebody who needs to play on the edge, or are they quite relaxed? How do they communicate? What runs do they make off the ball? Although the videos are getting better in terms of wider angle, you can see a little bit more of that. You still can't see everything. Some scouts like to go and see warm-ups, etc., like that. How they integrate with people, how they integrate with the staff on the pitch who are taking the warm-ups, how they even integrate with the fans, in terms of walking off the pitch. And then it goes through the process of, your part-time scouts there, although it says senior scouts there. I don't particularly like that phrase in terms of, it's probably more the full-time scouts. And I think at that stage, you're becoming more focused. I think one thing you'll hear me say quite a lot over the next 10 minutes or so is focused. I think one thing it has done in terms of the data and video, it makes departments more focused. So in terms of you're really then drilling down into the information of, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses / coaching points. I think in terms of, and I'm guilty, and a lot of people are guilty of it, is when someone goes and watches a player, they come back and first thing they tell you is what they can't do, which is great. You do need to know what they can't do. But I would much prefer to know what they can do and how they can benefit the team. Now, every player is certainly going to have weaknesses, certainly at the level that we're trying to look for. If players don't have weaknesses, in all due respect, they're not coming to the championship. They're going way beyond us. But I would much prefer to know what they can do rather than what they can't do. So what are they going to bring to the team? Yes, the weaknesses you can work on, and they're coachable points, which is fine. So then it goes through, and again, you're whittling the players down. It goes down then obviously to my level, the head of recruitment. And at this point, you're really down to a small number of players. Again, because of the time frame in trying to get through. Now, all the players going through will have fitted to the player profiles. So by the time it gets to the latter end of the process, I think there shouldn't be any players in there who don't fit the profile, who haven't fitted the data or the video profile, or even the character references I've put on there, the background checks, which Stuart and Justin touched on, to be honest. In terms of, we do a lot on character stuff, and the character stuff would stop a player straight away, probably more than would ability stuff. I think in terms of that, you've got to be very careful in terms of who you bring into the dressing room, into the training ground. We're fortunate enough to have a lot of very young, talented players at our club. So, keeping the environment and the changing room correct is a massive part for us, to be honest. It's one of the biggest things we've tried to implement over the last couple of years in terms of making sure we get the right player through. And I suppose a lot of it's underpinned with the question at the bottom: would you sign this player? Now, it's giving the scouts accountability. Yes, it's a yes or no question. Would you sign this player? I'm not a big fan of monitor. I'm not a big fan of watch again, although from at times you are going to have to watch them again. But, giving them accountability, putting your neck on the line, would you be happy if you sign this player and then they work through the process until they come out the other end and that's the one we want to sign? Now, I think that question tends to scare a few people from time to time. You're not going to get every player right. No, nobody is going to get every player right. Somebody who says they've never signed a bad player is, well, lying, to be honest, because in my opinion, because it's not. You're still dealing with human nature. You can't totally tell what somebody's going to be like, how someone's going to settle. You can have a good idea. Stuart touched on it earlier in terms of risk. That there's always going to be risk. In terms of who you're bringing in, you never quite know how they're going to settle, how their family's going to settle, how their kids are going to settle, are they going to like school, etc., etc. So that's it in terms of the recruitment process, in terms of how we work through. It's not a case of an agent throws in a player and suddenly then we go and sign that player. It has to work through the process that fits for our club, like Stuart touched on earlier. It doesn't work for every club, it works for us. And this is always evolving. So I think I'm moving on. The role of the head of recruitment at QPR is ensuring there's a clear scouting strategy. Now I've just touched on the process, which is great, but then you also need a strategy in terms of who are you targeting, what areas are you targeting, what teams are you targeting. I'm not a big fan of targeting leagues, especially from our situation, because I will use the Bundesliga for an example, just it's due to start this weekend. The top end of the Bundesliga, we're not going to be able to attract players from the top end of the Bundesliga. They're playing European football. The likes of Dortmund, Bayern Munich, etc. They're, all due respect, they're not going to want to come and play in a championship team. So I think it's important to have a clear scouting strategy, and I think that can only be started if you have a clear club philosophy. So, the hierarchy of the club, the manager, the director of football, they come up with a club philosophy. And then we work off the back of that, really, in terms of the player profiles, in terms of what are we looking for. And that guides us in terms of where we're looking, in terms of what our strategy is going to be. Is it going to be targeting teams that are going to get relegated? Is it targeting out of contracts? Is it targeting Premier League squads? Is it targeting younger players? Is it targeting older players? It all depends on terms of what you're looking for in terms of how your squad depth is. We work off depth charts quite a lot. And I'll touch on it in a little bit in terms of not blocking pathways. But one thing I think I probably have done in the role in the last 4 months or whatever it may be now is try to bring a more data and video approach in terms of having that as our first barrier in terms of before we send scouts out on the road, on planes, overnights, and to be honest, you're wasting time and money. We don't have the luxury where we have unlimited funds to be able to do that. We don't have scouts in different countries. We predominantly UK-based scouts, although we do have a couple in European countries. So we need to be more efficient and time efficient in how we work. The next point is that diligence on players. Touched on it earlier in terms of the character. We want to know everything about the player, their family, their how they operate, what they like to do, languages, etc., whatever it may be. How they deal with staff, how are they on a day-to-day basis? Because they're not just working with the players; they have to work with the backroom staff as well. How good are they on at taking information? In terms of the coach or the managers trying to get into them, they how receptive are they to adapting and adaptability? So in terms of that, I'm almost overseeing all the recruitment process. So I'm involved probably in the beginning stage of it, 1 and 2, and I'm certainly involved in the stage 5. But in terms of 3 or 4, we work through lists, and I'm not somebody who likes to micromanage. We've got the scouts in place because that they are employed by the club. I've been very fortunate enough to inherit a very good scouting team. That's what we are, we're a team within a team. So I tend to let them get on with it. I think Stuart touched on it earlier in terms of, you know, empowering the scouts in terms of they know what they're looking for in terms of player profiles. They know what they're looking for in terms of budget, philosophy, etc. like that. So I think it's important to let them get on with their job as well. I still see what's coming through the stages similar to the DC sticky board, I think it was. You know, we have similar stages and they work through those stages depending on which position and which things we need. One thing we probably are in a position to do at the moment, when they're working through the stages, we almost have two departments in each stage. So we have what we would class as starting players, and we also have what we would class as investment players. Now, we're in a position where we probably need starting players at the moment. That's just, you know, we're in a transition stage. But also, it doesn't mean we neglect the investment stage. We have an underlying list of players that we think might be 6 months away, 12 months away. You know, so we're almost working 2 transfer windows ahead. Doesn't mean we stop looking at the nearest transfer window, but we're already developing a list for the summer transfer window, the winter transfer window, whenever it may be that it's going to restart. Now, some of you might say, well, surely it makes more sense to go and get the investment players now. You'll get them cheaper. And yeah, generally you probably would do. But again, I will touch on it. It's all about blocking pathways and that sort of stuff. We might not need a younger one. We might already have one. We might need somebody for 6 months. We might not, you know, because we've got somebody 6 months away who we think can play first team football. I think one thing, you know, we're in a privileged position in terms of the players coming through the academy at the moment. You know, the academy doing a tremendous job in terms of producing more players and more of, you know, the recent months, which is shown in our starting 11 in terms of the players and on the bench that we've got coming through. So we're almost trying to work 2 transfer windows ahead. It sounds idealistic, and it is to a little certain degree, but I think in terms of it helps with our long-term planning. Do we know what we've got coming through? Do we know what we have is out there if we needed somebody at 17, 18 because we're going to lose our best 17, 18-year-old because a bigger club's going to come in and buy them? So I think in terms of that, obviously speaking to agents, which, you know, do so on a daily basis, in terms of information, in terms of, Stuart touched on it, in terms of networking and finding out who's available, who's where, who's what, who's not happy, whatever those situations may be. And I suppose another part of the role is form a transfer committee, if you like, although I don't like that phrase. That's with the director of football, the manager, and myself from a footballing point of view. And I've touched on it earlier in terms of depth charts. One thing we're very conscious about doing at QPR is not blocking pathways. Excuse me. You know, that there is no point us going and signing a right back for 4 years, example, when we've got somebody for 6 months away from the first team. You might need somebody, whether that be on loan or a short-term deal. Because I suppose the holy grail for most clubs, and it certainly is we want to produce our own players. We want to produce, every academy wants to produce their players. They want to play in the first team. And if they need to sell them, you know, what's the next on the conveyor belt? So I think we're very conscious about doing that in terms of who we bring in, you know, what is value for money for us in terms of we don't want to backlog or we don't want to lose players. You know, what constitutes the best value? It may not be the number 1 on the list. It may be the number 3 on the list. You know, it all depends, and that depends which market you're shopping in. You know, whether it's an emerging market or a player from a bigger club. It just depends in terms of where you are on a financial basis. And then I think that leads us on to probably player dossiers in terms of that, in terms of presenting to the stakeholders, in terms of all the evidence we've collated, in terms of character, finance, background, playing, injury ability, reports, data, video. They're quite comprehensive dossiers in terms of that. in terms of us providing as much information as we can to make sure that we are making the best decision for the football club and long-term decision for the football club. Like I touched on earlier, everybody's going to get players wrong from time to time. Nobody's going to have 100% strike rate. But it's eliminating the risk to the best you can in terms of getting the best players, in terms of, is this right for us? So just at the bottom there, in terms of, I suppose, my time, in a normal time, probably not so much in this situation, constant dialogue with the director of football, the manager. I'm very lucky to have open communication with the two people, very clear lines in terms of what we're trying to do. And when in normal situations, probably 80% of my time is spent watching videos and data and looking through players at stage 1, stage 2, who's got stage coming through. That's probably slightly different now in terms of the situation we're in. In reality, it's probably most of my day now, apart from speaking to agents. But even that, it's just tentative things at the moment because nobody really knows what's going to happen. The live scouting is obviously taking a back seat and probably will do for the foreseeable future. So I suppose in terms of the development of the scouting in the last couple of years, the biggest thing for me is the data. There's more and more data companies becoming available. There's more and more scrambling for that niche in the market, if you like. And I still think a lot of clubs are still finding out how to use it most effectively, for them. It might not be the same for everybody. In terms of, you see adverts quite a lot at the moment in terms of clubs bringing in data scouts, whether that's through an internship or whether that's through, full-time roles. That's becoming quite common at the moment. It's certainly becoming the fastest growing area, I would say, in football at the moment. One thing I think that data has done is leveled the playing field in terms of identification. You don't necessarily need scouts in every country now, although if you can get it and you can afford it, great. But I think in terms of the players, it was touched on earlier in terms of the undervalued or missed players. I think that is becoming smaller and smaller as clubs rely on more data and data, to try and identify from the emerging markets, if you like. So I think it has leveled the playing field slightly. I think clubs are still trying to work out how best to use data and how best to fit it into their process. We're certainly one of them. We're very much trying to develop all the time in terms of our data modelling. And like I touched on earlier, it allows a more focused scouting. Gone are the days where I think you are relying on luck in terms of, have you got a scout at the game where that player happens to have a good game, and that player wants to come to your club, and that player then you can afford. I think in terms of that, those days are becoming less and less. I think most scouts now are at a game for a reason. There'd be very few scouts, I would imagine, just taking in games. Although that is great if you've got no focused player to go from. I'm not trying to stop people going to live games in any way, shape or form, because that still is a major part of the recruitment process. But I think more scouts are going now watching specific players that have been flagged up through data or videos. And I touched on the recruitment analyst just a minute ago, in terms of that is a role that is becoming more and more prevalent in clubs. I'm very fortunate to have Paul Goller, who probably is watching this, to be honest. He's very good. I'm very fortunate to have him in terms of that, in terms of him developing the data models and I think that role is going to take on a bigger and bigger impact in terms of how it goes forward. One thing I want to touch on, I saw a question earlier actually, was as good as data is at the moment, in terms of a lot of the companies are touching on it's historical data. And I think one thing you might see in the next year or two is a big drive on the artificial intelligence side of it. So, and I've spoke to a couple of companies this week about it, in terms of, if you take that player out of that club, how is he going to perform in your club, in your league, in your philosophy, with your players? Which I can see that over the next year, 2 years, however long it may be. I think that is where it's going to end up going, and in my opinion, probably where it should be going. Because it's okay saying this is the data from the club where he's been playing. It might not be very adaptable, say, to the Championship, to QPR, to the philosophy. So I think that will be a big development over the next year or so, as I say. And then I'll just touch on how scouting's affected during this COVID-19 at the moment. We're very much a sole emphasis on data and scouting at the moment. We're still working through those stages and those processes, but it's been done off videos, data, rather than we're taking out the live games and we're all jumping onto stage 2, if you like, using the likes of Sci Sports in terms of, identifying teams that are very similar to us, that have the same Sci Sports index, etc. And other companies we use, we use many data companies, many video companies. I think one thing it has done is it's made us more efficient. Yeah, we're churning over actually a lot more players now than we were when we were live scouting. And I know Stuart touched on it in terms of you're bucketing similar players, but I think one thing it does do is it gives you a list. So when the games restart, you know who you're going to look for. You've ruled out a lot of the non-applicable players, if you like. So that I think it has made us more efficient. It has made us get through more players. I think we're probably in a better position now than we probably would have been if this wouldn't have happened. And I suppose one impact is going to be the financial situation. I was reading in the Football Observatory a couple of weeks ago that they're claiming there's going to be a 28% drop against the big 5 leagues in terms of budgets. Now that would affect transfer fees, salaries, and also loan fees, which seems to have been escalating over the last couple of years. So I think it will almost hit the reset button in terms of that, which almost should put the ball back in the club's hands, really, in terms of that, in terms of, the powers then shifted a little bit in terms of back into the club's favour, back into the buying market's favour, rather than a selling club or an out of contract player. Might not do that, would be my opinion that it might be. And I think one final thing from that is I think very rarely in recruitment do you get a chance to hit the pause button. Now that doesn't mean we're sat with our feet up drinking a cup of tea, but in terms of improving your processes, without extra data coming in, without extra video coming in, etc., I think it gives you a chance to actually reevaluate and how you want to operate. And it's certainly made me and, the club think about things in a different way in terms of once we go through this process, are we just going to resort back to what we did? Or are we going to take on board how we've operated during this process? Now, 2 things. If you're not evaluating your process right now, you're either very good or very lucky that you've got a perfect process for you in place. If you're not doing it and you're not in that situation, I would suggest you're probably losing ground, for the want of a better phrase. You might be in risk of being left behind in terms of that. I think everyone can improve their process in whatever it may be, whether it's recruitment or anything. Certainly from a communication point of view, it certainly gave us a different way of thinking. So that's how we're scouting during the COVID-19. A couple of further constraints is, and I suppose it's similar to the MLS and the A-League salary caps. We're very much governed by financial fair play on a rolling 3-year term. Now, you wouldn't need to search very far for that and QPR to find it's very much well documented over the last few years that we've, originally struggled against financial fair play from the Premier League days. So I think in terms of that, it's almost a soft salary cap really for us, that there's clubs struggling with it at the moment. We've been very fortunate over the last couple of years where we've managed to, I suppose, get it under control, where the board and Lee and Les and the manager have done a terrific job in still doing that, and we've still made where we are. There's 6 points off the playoffs, and we've trimmed our wage bill and etc. in terms of transfer fees as well. So I think that's another constraint we've got to bear in mind, similar to the salary caps from the other guys spoke about. And one final thing I just want to touch on, without getting all political about it, is Brexit. That's obviously going to majorly impact how we operate. Now, from all reports, there's a risk that the transfer window might open in September, whenever it may be, and run right through to January. Now as it stands, the point system for the Brexit is geared to the Premier League clubs. So, in terms of them allocating enough points, it'll be done on a wages or fee, which certainly we can't compete with at QPR. And I would very much doubt that many Championship clubs could do. So we could end up with a situation where September, October, November, December, you could end up signing EU players. And then once they're in, they can, feel free as long as they have the right to remain. But in January, you might not be able to sign EU players as it stands. So you almost could end up with 2 transfer windows in one, which, as well as the season hopefully being back playing. So it could make it very interesting in terms of that. So not just from a COVID point of view, but from certainly from a Brexit point of view in the English clubs. So I think there's a lot of things to keep in consideration where we are now. It's very much up in the air in terms of that. We're trying to be as proactive as we can, but as anybody who works in the industry know, you can only be proactive to a certain degree. A lot of this, especially with those constraints and the leagues playing, it's going to be as reactive as it's probably ever been with the games going, to be honest. So yeah, that's about where we're at really in terms of that. I don't want to talk much longer. I appreciate I've probably gone on a bit longer than I should have done. So I think that's where we're at. So yes, I suppose if there's any questions, we can go to the question stage.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andrew. I saw Justin was still watching and listening to you, even though it's 2 a.m. So I don't think you talk too long. So for all the insights. Well, there are several questions for you. Actually, the first one I'm gonna get on stage is a question on: can you actually determine the scouting cost to identify an individual player before you bring them in, or is it really hard?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a tough question to answer that, to be honest. I'll address the trial bit side of it, really, to be honest. The clubs we're taking on, the players we're taking, if we take players on trial, wouldn't necessarily be attached to other clubs. Chances are it's somebody we will probably have known about for, a few years, years ago. We signed a player a couple of months ago who we'd known about for a long time. He happened to be without a club, so we brought him in on a trial. And fingers crossed, well, he did really well and we signed him, so hopefully he continues to progress. Yeah, it's a difficult one to put your finger on that in terms of the scouting cost. I don't really know how to go about answering that. It varies, to be fair, in terms of I suppose it depends on where they are not so much on a trial, but if we're going to sign them, I suppose it depends on where they are based. Obviously, the scouting cost will be a lot less if they're playing in London, and it will be a bit more if they're playing in Scotland, and it will be a lot more if they're playing in Croatia, for example. So yeah, it's a very difficult one to answer. We obviously, from a club's point of view, we try and keep the cost down as much as we can, hence using the data and the video to stop scouts flying here, there, and everywhere. In terms of an agent puts in a player and on a Thursday and we're on a flight on a Friday to watch the player. It's just unrealistic. Yeah, it's financially not efficient. So I'm not sure if that answers the question or not.
Yeah, but individual cases are really hard to measure, and also depends, of course, on the exact situation.
Yeah.
But I have a question myself, actually. That's the fact that you are so long at the same club already. Do you believe that helps you because now you can find other ways within the club and everybody knows where to find you?
Yeah, I think it helps. I'm probably in the minority, to be fair, in terms of that. I've been there, 12 years now, a long time. I think it helps in terms of I have a very good understanding of how the club works, and every club has different way of working and stuff like that. Been very fortunate to move up in my career at QPR, which, obviously the hierarchy have put faith in me, if you like, to try and, to move up the ladder or to try and introduce new processes, which I'm obviously very grateful for from the club. So yeah, I think it does help to a certain degree. I think sometimes if somebody else goes into a new club, they can probably work from a blank piece of paper and put their own stamp on it probably a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
In terms of that, rightly or wrongly, we are putting a different stamp on it. It's, probably more gradual steps than if, say, somebody come in and got rid of everybody, if you like. I think one thing that happens in football is people don't really give people a chance in terms of that. So I think if say they brought in another head of recruitment and you hear about it all the time, I think if the first thing they do is they want to bring their own people in, which, we all have people we trust and all that sort of stuff. But I think you don't actually give the people you've already got in the building a chance, in terms of you've probably got some very good people already in there who have probably been fighting to make the same changes that you're trying to make, but they've not been allowed. I think people are in danger of going and saying, well, this hasn't worked, so everybody's not very good. That's certainly not the case. There's some very good people. Well, most of the people, if not all the people at QPR, are very good people. I touched on it earlier in terms of the scouts. I'm very fortunate to have a very good team of scouts working with me, and they are a team I inherited. But they're very good scouts. They're very good at what they do.
Yeah, cool. I also had many questions about a player that I think you had on loan, Jan Mlakar.
Yes.
Many people are questioning about him. I think it was a loanee, but I think everyone wanted to know that why he didn't succeed at your club, or what was maybe special about him in the first place. I don't know if you can touch on that, but
yeah, he was on loan with us for the first part of the season. I suppose he was probably a victim of circumstance, really, more than anything. We brought in Jan, but then, we also brought in Naki Wells and Jordan Hugel, who both, well, certainly from Naki's point of view and from Jordan's point of view, both hit the ground running. Naki Wells was brilliant for us, and he continued to be brilliant for Bristol City. So he got very limited game time, which, you look at his record from Maribor, his goal scoring record was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And obviously he went to Brighton and we took him on loan. I think it was just a case of he couldn't get the game time. That's not a poor indication of him. He was just up against two very good strikers who knew the Championship inside out and have succeeded in the Championship for seasons and seasons before this. Jan probably had to have a bit more settling in time in terms of, coming into a Championship club. I would dare say it's probably very different to most leagues in terms of the style and probably the tempo of it in terms of that. So it took him a bit longer to settle in. And by that point, as I say, Naki and Jordan had hit the ground running and were doing the job, so they had no reason to come out of the team. So that's all it was, really. He's obviously gone on loan now, Jan, and fingers crossed he does well for him because he's a nice guy.
Yeah, cool. And the final question, it's about scouting in certain regions. Do you believe that a player can be found in any league, or do you only look at specific countries? And it might also have to do something with the profiling of certain players on a certain position.
Yeah, I think there's players all over the world. You know, there'll be examples of world-class players come out of leagues you would never even think of. You know, in terms of that. So I think there are players coming out of every league. I think I touched on it earlier in terms of depending on what club you are, I think you can be in the danger of casting your net too wide. And so you cover a lot of players, but not probably as the in-depth as you would have liked. I'm probably more the other way in terms of I would like us to be focused in specific areas, specific teams, leagues to a certain degree, and know everything about those leagues. Now, come the transfer window from agents, there's going to be players come up that you're unsure of, you don't really know, because they will be coming from markets that you're not really scouting in. You can quickly catch up, you know, in terms of through the data modeling, through the videos. Are they going to fit through yourselves at Sci Sports? You know, where are they ranked? What are they? You know, where's the league ranked? You know, in terms of the championship, etc. So, although I'm not overly a big fan of scouting leagues per se, I think I would much prefer to scout teams in terms of how they play, philosophy. It limits the adaptability. It limits, you know, the transition. I think the less transition for a player. It's a big transition, especially coming from a different country. Myself and Stuart's obviously had to do it now as well in America, but going to the UAE, it's a big thing, let alone trying to play football, let alone moving your family, moving your kids. So I think in terms of that, I think it's the less change you can have, the better. So whether that is scouting teams rather than leagues, is a way I would prefer to go. But yeah, there's players coming out of every league.
At least you can scout again in the Bundesliga starting from this weekend. So
yes, we're planning on watching most. There's a couple of games in the Bundesliga at the weekend that are not really relevant to us. I'll let people decide which games they are. So it's going to be nice watching live games, if you like. But yeah, it's like I say, it's been a good chance to reset in terms of processes in this. There's still a long way to go for us. I'm not sure we're totally there at the moment, but who knows when we'll be back playing.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure to have you here, Andy. Let's hope you will get some nice continuation of the championship, or at least have a good closure for you. And well, it's one of my dreams to have a 5-month transfer window. So let's see what comes out of there.
It might be chaos. I think it might be a bit like the Wild Leagues, but it'll be fun.
Yeah, definitely.